End of Watch was one of the first movies that I ever added to my IMDb watch list. I've tried watching it before a couple of times, but I've never really been in the mood for it, and so I finally sat down and watched it tonight, and in all honesty, I was surprised by how good it was. The style works really well with what the story is dealing with, and although there are some very distinct flaws, it's a movie that really gives you a gut punch of emotions when it matters. A majority of the story in End of Watch revolves around the relationship between Brian and Mike, who are portrayed by Jake Gyllenhaal and Mike Pena, rather than having a distinct plotline. It's difficult for me to structure this review into the three separate sections that I would normally use, because the best aspect of the movie is the connections between the story, characters, and presentation. The film is more of a collection of moments in the lives of Brian and Mike than one that has a solid story progression. There are events that connect the moments and scenes together, but for the most part things aren't assembled like a regular story. The best thing that comes out of this is the time it gives you with Brian and Mike, and the time it gives you to get to know them. Rather than creating situations that push their characters to the limit, there is more of a focus on just showing how they are regularly. How they interact with each other, and how they work together while in pursuit, making arrests, or searching a house are all integral to the impact of the final scenes because it adds so much extra detail to their relationship. Both characters are fleshed out in first, how they act while on the job, and second, how they act in everyday life. While they may not be the most likable characters in the world, they are consistent, and that's the most important part. Their likability isn't what makes them relatable, or what made what happened to them impactful, it was more to do with how well I felt I knew them, and how well I knew their relationship, and that's something that the film conveys well. I'll mention it here because it seems most appropriate. The music choices add a lot to how I felt about the relationship between Brian and Mike. The soundtrack is upbeat and uses a lot of classic tunes, but enhanced how safe they felt around each other regardless of where they happened to be. They seemed to feel invincible around each other, and the soundtrack reflected that. Although what plot is present in the film is predictable and generic, it doesn't impede on the film's ability to make you empathize with Brian and Mike. I might have been able to see the end of the film coming from 90 minutes away, but when the moment came, it was still incredibly impactful, and although I thought I had the whole ending picked out, End of Watch does throw in a curveball for the last scene, and it was for me the best part of the film. End of Watch throws a final curveball for the last scene, and it was for me the best part of the film. One of the flaws that is present in End of Watch, however, is with the supporting characters. They are kind of like templates and archetypes without a lot of personality. The supporting characters that have an impact on the progression of Brian and Mike's characters work well, but outside of this distinction, it's hard to engage with any of the other characters. Scenes that feature neither Brian nor Mike are kind of hard to get into. The other part of this is how people talk, and this does apply to Brian and Mike, but their characters have enough meat to them so that it's not distracting like it is on the other supporting characters. The vocabulary of most characters in End of Watch is about 20 words, and the frequency with which people swear is incredibly irritating. I read before I watched the movie that the swearing was distracting, but I thought whoever wrote the review must have been overreacting, but it's something that really does take away from the moment when there's nothing to focus on except 4 people who can't go 2 seconds without saying a variation of fuck. The film is in the top 10 for most frequent and total uses of fuck, and it's only an issue because it overly simplifies characters' speech patterns, and thus it's hard to engage with what they're saying regardless of how important it is. The presentation of End of Watch is something that links well with the lack of clear and obvious story threads. The film's structure being a series of moments is reflected in its found footage style. It's edited like someone filmed their life to just document what was happening, which worked to increase the immersion of the film by making it more realistic and believable. It felt to me like I was watching someone's movie that they just edited every now and again when they got home and had some free time. In addition to this, how End of Watch made use of police body cams and dash cams was interesting, and it also provided a lot of the film's most intense frames. The on-foot chases that utilize the first-person perspective of the body camera are tense and real, and the only issue I really have with this kind of footage is the way it's edited in some of the more action-heavy sequences of the film. Where in most places I'd be inclined to put the movie down for being essentially unintelligible in some parts, I'm not as negative about it in this situation because of how consistent that decision is with the rest of the film. I'm not praising End of Watch for its action, but I'm not as negative about the style of editing given its context within the film. There are scenes where instead of sticking to the realism that comes with using found footage, the film altered it with slow motion or jump cuts and stuff like that, and it did feel forced to me. I appreciated the realism of End of Watch's style, and I wish it had stuck to this all of the time. So I'm pretty overall pleasantly surprised by the connection between the different aspects of End of Watch, and I would definitely recommend checking it out, not only for that, but also because it's just an immersive and entertaining film.
End of Watch. That's an 8 out of 10.